There we go. Welcome to the September Water Commission meeting. And we'll call ourselves to order at 4:01. And item 2 is the first item in terms of approving the minutes from the August 17th meeting. Do I have anybody that would like to make some amendments or corrections to the minutes? Nope. Can I get a motion?
I'll move that we approve because I was there.
Okay. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Nope. Okay. Minutes are approved as done. Again, thank you, Marion, for excellent minutes. Okay, now item 3, public participation. Public participation enables the public to address the commission about an item that is not on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission, please state your name and address for the record. The Arizona open meeting law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item which is not listed on the prepared agenda. The commission members may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. Public comment should be limited to 3 minutes reading time. So do we have any public comments? Good. Our city manager does.
Thank you, Chair, Commission. Greetings. This is an update, and I will certainly keep it within 3 minutes. The topic is the Rio de Flag Watershed Alliance. This matter was before you at that August 17th meeting, and I came up to the podium and asked very respectfully to have a little more time with it internally for the purpose of going through the documentation and addressing some needed edits and so forth. And this commission was very accommodating and allowing us to do just that. On September 6th, Ed Schenk and myself met with 2 members of the proponents of the Alliance Group, Rick Miller and Paul Byer. We met in my office and had a very fruitful discussion about the formative documents that were before you on August 17th. And we pointed out areas of concern and just in terms of how things were written with respect to the formative resolution, as well as some of the language within the plan itself. It was a very good discussion, as mentioned. We got through it, and nothing but agreement came out of that as to the suggested edits. Since that time, we have been working on getting those edits implemented. There will need to be a little bit more back and forth. And then at that point, we will also need to vet it a little bit more internally with our legal division and others. And I think I represented to you back in August that we were going to give this quick attention, which I believe we are doing. I would hope, I expect that we'll have this back to you at your October meeting. And assuming we'll get commission buy-in, and I don't make that assumption, but we're going to queue it up for you as best as we can. Then we can immediately go forward to the City Council for the same purpose. So things are moving, and I think they're moving in a very positive direction. Thank you. Yep.
Excellent, thank you. So we look forward to potentially seeing that on the October agenda. And I would only, well, I can't say anything, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any other items for public participation? All right, seeing none, let's move to new business, Article 4. So we'll move to item 4A, the Rio de Flag Hydrology Study Summary. And that is going to be delivered by Mr. Ed Schenk. So thank you, Ed.
No, thank you, Commissioner. So this will be a very brief, hopefully, summary of the 2018 FEMA grant that we received for the Rio de Flag hydrology study. So this is a cooperative technical partnership, CTP grant from FEMA that came to the city of Flagstaff back in 2018. So we've had about 5 years in this. Some background on this study. So again, this is just an informative item here, just a summary of where we went with the study now that it's complete. So some background with the why. The Rio de Flag watershed has only had 2 comprehensive hydrologic studies, one in 1983 and then one in 2000. So the 2000 was the Army Corps study for the Rio de Flag Flood Control Project. A great study, by the way, very long-winded if you want to read it sometime. Some interesting tidbits in there. So the reason for this 2018 grant from FEMA was due to some of the flood flow predictions that we've seen that vary greatly within the community. So everything from the FEMA FIS to the flood insurance study in 2010, the Army Corps study, which I mentioned in 2000, the Northeast Area Master Drainage Study for another example for a regional study, and then some of these regional curves, including what's used quite often these days, USGS Stream Stats, also called the National Stream Flow Statistical Program. And these all vary for good reason. There's based on assumptions of infiltration, evapotranspiration losses, different rainfall runoff calculation methods, et cetera. So the hope here and with this grant was to try to nail down some of the variation between these and then also explain what might be a good path forward. So in 2018, Jim Janisek, who was with the Stormwater section at the time, put together a grant, who was awarded $200,000 with a 75% match from that FEMA CTP program to study fairly comprehensively the hydrology of the Rio de Flag watershed. This study was composed of 3 sections. So we had a data collection task with several subtasks, statistical analysis of the data, and then update to a hydrologic model that was first put forward in 2017. This is a Mike Shee model, so it's a 2-dimensional model, somewhat similar to what we see a lot in these updates, the Flow2D that Jay Fuller provides us, but slightly different backgrounds and assumptions within it. So again, this presentation just provides a quick overview of the results of this grant. It was completed in 2023, so about 2 years late due to some delays and staff turnover in the stormwater section. You can find this online, so if you can't follow the slides that I put together about half an hour ago that I have not practiced, you can find the entire study online. So if you go to the Stormwater Library, which is on our City of Flagstaff page, we have both an executive summary as well as an overview of all 3 tasks, so data collection, statistical analysis, and hydrological analysis. The executive summary is pretty short, it's only 24 pages, I believe. Each of the other 2 tasks, or 3 tasks, are about 200 pages each, so fairly lengthy to get through those, but it does provide the background to it. The study contents, so here these are the major tasks that go into it. So we did attempt to get a better handle on soil infiltration rates, because that's a big unknown for a lot of the studies in the Rio. Unfortunately, because of both staff turnover and COVID, we had a really hard time getting a consultant that really could do that with the budget that we had. So we didn't have much of an update. Spring Stewardship Institute did do a small infiltration study for us. The results were fairly inconclusive. Aaron Young had Natural Channel Design do an aquifer recharge feasibility study that had some pretty good results, but there's a few issues with it that makes it hard to use on a larger scale. We've had 2 fluvial geomorphic studies by Natural Channel Design as well, with some pretty interesting results, which I'll go over today. Some culvert surveys and stage discharge relationships are put together by Woodson Engineering for our stage gauges or our flood gauges throughout town. And then we also attempted to update the historical flood accounts, which are in the 2010 flood insurance study, also in the Army Corps study. Very interesting flood history, especially in the early part of the city. Unfortunately, the 2 NEU students that we tasked with that kind of took it a different direction, and their master's thesis kind of went in a different direction that we could not use that data. For the statistical analysis, we had 2 real products that came out of that. So we used a regional USGS stream gauge analysis by Frances O'Donnell, who used to work at NAU. She's now at Auburn University. So this was looking at regional long-term USGS stream gauges in high elevation locations of New Mexico and Arizona to upgrade our regional curves. So this is the regional curve that's used by the USGS Stream Stats program. Had some pretty interesting results from that, as well as a shorter series that I worked with for our non-USGS stream gauges, about 50 gauges in the Flagstaff area, using the Bulletin 17B analysis, which is a pretty typical USGS and Army Corps analysis. Again, short time series, so the results are what they are. And then for task 3 was the hydrologic analysis. That's where we updated the 2017 Mike Shee model with some new inputs of data. So this was completed by J.E. Fuller this summer. So that was the end of this study, as you will. So we'll walk through some of that. Trying to keep it fast and simple. So from the data collection, one of the more interesting results you can see in this graph here. This is a graph that Natural Channel Design put together. On the bottom, so the x-axis is watershed area, and on the y-axis is cross-sectional area of a channel. And really what they're putting together here is a curve. So it's a regional curve. As a channel gets larger, as a watershed gets larger, you expect the cross-sectional area of a channel to get larger because it should have more discharge. These two lines that you see here are regional curves that were developed in the early 2000s for dozens of channels throughout New Mexico and Arizona. So kind of what we should see typically, and this is all log scale here. And then all these dots are areas within the Flagstaff area. Real takeaway here is that we have, without fire, without disturbance, we have very complacent watersheds. So an example would be what we call these San Francisco Peaks watersheds. These are these kind of brownish squares, and you see that they lie a lot lower than anything else. They're below the regional curves as well as the rest of the other scatter plots here. So what that means is that they have very small channels for the watershed size, which means that they don't see a lot of floods. They don't see a lot of flows. Now, what's also interesting is they have these X marks here. Those are post-burn watersheds. So those are mostly from the Schultz fire, but also there's a few from the museum fire in there now. And you can see just that change from complacent watersheds to violent watersheds. We call those in the industry, if you will. So you talk about orders of magnitude larger channel cross-sectional area compared to the complacent ones from before. So you're seeing a change in the hydrology as we expect with disturbance. So essentially we have pre-disturbance, these very complacent watersheds that change very quickly with disturbance. One of the real takeaways here is it makes flood predictions a lot harder when we know that the watersheds change rapidly based on fire, urbanization, thinning, et cetera. It's not like you would have in Iowa where it doesn't matter if you changed from alfalfa to corn, it's going to be the same runoff essentially. From the statistical analysis, again, just kind of giving one of the key takeaways. This is from Frances O'Donnell, again, now at Auburn. She redid with those, I want to say it was like 200 USGS gauges, 101, I take that back, 101 long-term USGS stream gauges. She was able to come up with some new regional curves for annual exceedance probability, so our flood estimates. And really what she found was, and she looked at it from a lot of different ways, from vegetation, elevation, slope, et cetera, for these different gauges, stream gauges. And what she found was the only place that had a difference from what we were already seeing with the USGS Stream Stats program is the geology. So the igneous gauges, so those are the volcanic ones like we have on the San Francisco Peaks, are more complacent than what USGS predicts for flooding, whereas the sedimentary gauges like we have on the south side of town, the karstic ones, fit very well with the USGS. So again, kind of an interesting study here of, and it goes right to what was shown in the point before. If you don't have fire and you have rather pristine, if you will, watersheds on igneous, on volcanic soils, they tend to be rather complacent, and then they can get disturbed rather easily. And when that happens, you see a lot more floods. Again, it has an interesting impact when we try to do flood predictions. And then the last one, and again, I'm simplifying this very quickly here. For the Mike Shee model that was rerun, very interesting results. That's in that task 3 summary. What we found is that the Mike Shee model really played very well with the existing models that J.E. Fuller has for FlowTD, played fairly well for the USGS Stream Stats, played fairly well with some other regional models like Northeast Area Master Drainage Study. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Actually, let me slow down a little bit here. One thing we looked at was the difference between summer monsoonal storms versus winter rain on snow events. So that was a question, because obviously in FEMA, they just have one design storm. We know we have two different types of storms here in Flagstaff. So we took a look at both, and one of the results here, and it shouldn't be too surprising, those summer monsoon storms have a higher peak usually, so a higher flash flood potential, more discharge, but they're flashy. So this is an example from Fanning Wash in that Mike Shee model. You can see it pops up very quickly and drops down very quickly as well. The winter storms usually do not have as high of a peak. I say usually, not always the case, but obviously higher volume. That's an example of Fanning Wash as well. You can see the cross section down here where it plays out for a much longer period. And again, shouldn't be too surprising. We saw that this year where we had some flooding in some low areas in the springtime over weeks, whereas in the summertime you may only see a flood that lasts for about 45 minutes. Okay, so I did get ahead of myself. Mike Shee model did largely agree with existing models that we have out there. The one model or the one forecast that was inconsistent was the 2000 Army Corps results. So the results that we have for the Rio de Flag flood control project. And here you can see an example of it. So you can see the Mike Shee model results for a winter design storm, a monsoon design storm, as well as the Army Corps model results for certain cross sections throughout town. And pretty consistently, the Army Corps is a little bit higher, or a fair bit higher. And there's some reasons for that. I mean, one, they're using an older rainfall data set. They're using Atlas 2 instead of Atlas 14. Probably not driving too much difference. There is an assumption that all new urbanization is unmitigated, which is obviously not true. We do have our LID ordinance as well as our stormwater design manual. So we do mitigate pretty well for urbanization. And then probably the bigger one here is the use of historical flood data to derive the annual exceedance probability. So they are using some of the floods that we've seen in the 1800s, the 1920s, 1930s for some of the annual exceedance probabilities. And you can do this. An example is really what we're using now with the Army Corps. They've moved on from Bulletin 17B to Bulletin 17C. This is a technical methods for doing annual exceedance probability. It's actually published in the USGS by the technical and methods 4-B5. And not to go way in the weeds, I'm already there, but one example of it here is if you have stream gauge data, that's great, but in 17C, if you know that you have floods in the past, you can actually put that into your statistical analysis, saying, you know that at a certain point, let's say it's 1920, you had a flood of however big that was, 3,000 CFS. So knowing that, you can bootstrap back in time. So if you only have 10 or 15 years of gauge data, but the community's been around for 150 years, you really have 150 years of data because you know when the big floods were. So it's actually a really cool way, if you will, of bootstrapping your data out so that you have 100 years or 150 years of flood data instead of only 10 or 15 years of gauge data. Now, the problem with that is in an area like Flagstaff, we essentially clear cut the entire watershed in the 1800s through the early 1900s. So by clear cutting it, we actually kind of did what a fire would do to some degree. And some of those early floods were likely derived because of the watershed condition that we had as a clear cut. So with that, we probably had larger floods than we would have today, as we have a rather forested condition up there. And the cool thing about that is it means that this Rio de Flag flood control, or the flood control project, is using assumptions that really kind of play into what we're worried about moving forward. And that is that it's an excellent example of what we might see if we have more fires on the peaks or if we have more disturbances up there. So even though it's a little more conservative than, you know, what we're seeing right now, it's actually a really good buffer for what we will see in the future as we have parts of the peaks burn. So just the fact that there is a little bit of discontinuity between those results is not a bad thing. And then we have lots of takeaways here. And again, I know we have other things to go through today, so, but just show that the 5-year study does have a lot of value. Again, if you want to read that executive summary, it's online. Really just wanted to provide a very quick update today. Trying to keep it non-technical, but I have a hard time doing that sometimes. And really, I think this is a good stepping stone to future studies, whether that's through CTP or whether that's through work with NEU or other partners of continuing our work with flood risk reduction. And that's also in the future research. I have this also in the executive summary, so we walk through some of the areas where we can improve this on the next iteration. And with that, apologies for a rather technical talk that I tried to slam into 10 minutes. Any questions?
Any questions? I've got two, but go ahead. Malcolm, go ahead.
Do I have to hold this down? Is it working? Yes, okay. So it's a flashback for me. One of the original ideas with the Mike Shee model and the FEMA money that came in was to build a model that could be used as the future goes forward. There was discussion about making it available to NAU, to Forest Service, and that through time, data could come in. Like if the Forest Service did some work out in the watershed, that could be reflected in the model. So is that still a goal, to make that available to others in the community?
Yes, I think it's still a goal. Whether it's a realistic goal is a hard one to say. So, and the reason I mentioned that is, one, it's proprietary software. So to reuse it, there is a cost involved. So for example, J.D. Fuller, who did do the work for us, did have to buy a license for it. Our existing license from 2015 was for a product that's essentially deprecated. It was not cheap. Another issue with it is Mike Shee, at least in this iteration, has a 100-foot grid element, which is acceptable for such a large watershed. But when we're talking about things like the Flow 2D models that we use for our post-wildfire, you're talking 20 feet originally down to 5 feet now. So, I mean, you're talking a much, much higher density of data that's driving that compared to what the Mike Shee was. So it's not that Mike Shee is wrong. It's just, it's not going to be this easy off the shelf collaboration that we can have NEU or ASU or whoever come in and just kind of throw out a new model result. It'd be great if we could, and I think that's still a lot of value moving forward. I'll be very interested to see the next version of, well, they're not going to call it HEC-RAS anymore, but whatever the next version of HEC-RAS is. So that's a free software by the Army Corps. It's a hydrologic engineering committee, if I'm remembering it right, HEC. So RAS is another modeling software for rivers and flood forecasting. And the next iteration, they're going to be merging it with a number of stormwater tools. So it has gone from a 1D to a 2D, and now it's going to move on from that. So that may be where we go, something like that, where it's free off the shelf. It's widely used in the industry. I think one of the problems also with Mike Shee is it's widely used in a handful of academic circles, but it hasn't seemed to really have taken off on the industrial side.
Okay, thanks. Whatever you go with, I wish you luck, and it's kind of sad to hear that, but I think I knew that was going to happen at the beginning because I don't think the model was widely accepted. So I hope you can get to some point because I think the watershed has a lot of challenges as far as runoff characterizing what the runoff is. So good luck.
So an ignorant question. With this, are there two potential things that might come out? One, do you try to look into the future and identify runoff streams that you might want to widen proactively? Sort of, this is an area we think there may be has a high risk of fire, therefore try to get on it before it comes out. And or if a fire happens, then you've got the ability to move and model rapidly what the effect will be in terms of runoff, right? I'm sure that's clearly, but I wasn't sure if there's a use for the first piece. If that's, or that might be just wasting your time because who knows what's going to happen, right?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't think it's ignorant at all. And it's one that we've been grappling with both at the city and the county. So the county definitely has been grappling with it more than we have of what can we do preventive So we know there's potential, obviously, for fire anywhere within the watershed. Some areas are definitely more at risk than others. Is there anything we can do at a preventive level beyond forest thinning? And obviously, forest thinning is one strategy, but is there anything that we can actually do on the ground in terms of upsizing conveyance or holding things in place better or detention, retention? So that's an open question. I don't have a solid answer, especially in the public forum, for that. But I would say it's something we're grappling with at multiple levels: city, county, the Forest Service, Army Corps. When I'm in meetings with them, it's definitely something they're thinking about. You know, can we spend $10 million instead of spending $200 million? So spend 10 million on the front side instead of 200 on the reactive side. So it's a great question. I don't think it's ignorant at all. Mike Shee can help with that, but again, with that large grid element, I think probably you'd have a little bit more success with some of the other models out there.
Thank you. You were too kind.
Maybe one more question. When you guys start talking about wildfire and the post-fire flooding, don't take this the wrong way, but I know that the County Flood Control District has a lot of forest thinning plans. Isn't the Rio de Flag on their agenda somewhere for forest thinning? And if they do that, and the forest fires are not catastrophic crown fires, then maybe our Rio de Flag watershed problem is solved. Is the county going to thin it?
Yeah, I'll leave that up to the county to answer you. I know they're working with the Forest Service as well as with the city wildland fire groups. I know there's some plans, and I don't know where they're at, to be honest. It's outside of my realm, for work near LaRue and up near Baderville and continuing beyond that. But I don't know their full study on that. I will say forest thinning might help, but that doesn't change the fact that we'll still have fires. So even the pipeline fire burned through areas that had thinned. Now, maybe it didn't burn as severely. Maybe it didn't have as bad of an impact in the areas that were thinned. I think that's kind of open for debate. That's a great question for a group like ERI, for the researchers. But on my side, boots on the ground, a fire is going to happen one way or the other. Thinning will likely help, but I don't think we've quantified how much of a help that's going to be yet.
Maybe I'll tag on to your question a little. Has there been any interaction with the Forest Service about what to do about steep slope areas like in the wilderness on the south side of the peaks and how that's going to be dealt with long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that's definitely a priority of the flood control district, and I'll just leave it at that because I don't know where they are with conversations on that.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, now for item 4B, a rate study update from Aaron Young.
Good evening, commissioners. Good afternoon. I need to pull this up on my laptop as well, so I have my notes. All right, thank you. Good evening, Erin Young, Water Resource Manager, and I'm here to provide an update on the rate study. This is not a formal rate study presentation, I would say. That would come from Stantec, but we wanted to present what's to come and what we're looking at. We're at, let's see here, move through. So we are at task 2. We're developing our 10-year financial plans that are entered into the model. The main outcome of this task is to develop annual revenue requirements for the water, reclaimed water, and wastewater funds. We will be requesting feedback and direction on the level of rate revenue adjustments for each fund. The first opportunity for feedback will be with City Council at a retreat they're having on October 12th. We invite you to attend the retreat, listen to the presentation from Stantec, and then we'll come back to the commission probably after that date to get your feedback as well. The rate revenue requirements for operation, maintenance, and capital costs, these are used in the cost allocation task and used to develop the rate charges to customers. So we'll work on developing 3 financial plan scenarios, and then we'll see how those trickle down to those cost allocations and the rate charges to customers. So this first part is a pretty important part to establish these financial scenarios. When those are presented, it's just important that, we'll present with our current rate structure, how those scenarios are filtered down to the customer in terms of like a common water bill, a common water charge, how the new rate would look to a residential and a commercial customer. But those may change as we then trickle down to developing, the different different rate models, different customer classes and such. Oops. So the considerations that go into the model include just our base operating budget. This is based on our averaged spending rate. So we have a budget that we don't spend 100% of, so that we're using sort of what we've done in the past to guide us on how we set that in the model going forward. So we're not charging our customers for, what we don't spend in the budget each year. It includes our carry forwards in our budget, which is our items that we don't necessarily complete in one fiscal year, and we have to carry that money into the next fiscal year. It includes our one-time requests for that aren't ongoing needs, and it includes our operating and maintenance capital. In the last couple of years, our balanced budget for operation and maintenance hasn't been adequate, so that is increasing in the rate model. We're considering, we have a couple policies. These last 3 bullets are standard. I'll be presenting these in the next presentation on our water policies. So these are pretty standard. They are conversation pieces, so if we wanted to talk about adjusting any of these policies. And then we have financial assumptions. These are kind of the levers that we have to build these 3 different rate strategies, one being the growth rate. We're assuming 1% annually. However, we've seen over the last decade, 1.5% will present a couple different growth rates that we could consider. This is kind of a more conservative setting that we're assuming now. Cost escalation factors, we're assuming a 3.5 general inflation rate. We have an exception for chemicals, utilities, equipment, and maintenance needs of 6%. And then we bring in what we call our approved CIP, is what is supported under our balanced budget. And then we have an informed CIP, which includes other CIP needs that don't fit within that approved budget. It's outside of the constraints that we're conforming to when we're setting the balanced budget, if that makes sense. That is adopted by City Council each year. And then we have unfunded projects. These might be projects on the horizon or that we might be addressing through funding strategies. And we bring those into the model as well. So the draft scenarios that we'll be presenting might look something like this. We may bring forward to Council on October 12th some changes, but we wanted to just get you sort of familiar with these ideas of a first scenario being a consumer price index increase. This assumes that the annual level of rate revenue adjustments are equal to the average change in water and sewer consumer price index. This scenario allows for a maximum annual adjusted level of CIP projects that can be funded with the level of rate adjustments. And then we have the smooth catch-up scenario and a full CIP and unfunded CIP scenario. So I won't read you these, but I'm glad to take any, we could have a discussion right now, or you can ask any questions. Again, these will be presented by Stantec at the City Council retreat on October 12th, and we'll be seeking direction from them on these scenarios. October 19th is our next meeting with the Water Commission, where we would present these scenarios and results from that discussion. And then I've provided some other timeline points here. So that's what I have for you tonight as an update. We'd be glad to take any questions or comments.
Any questions? Malcolm?
It seems like one of the wild cards is CIP and unfunded projects. Are there some things out there that we should be aware of that, you know, when you think about the final rates that'll be adopted and wild card projects in the unfunded list? And I don't know exactly what some of those are, but like Red Gap Ranch might be on there, for instance. So what are the things that are likely going to be the kind of the wild cards that are the ones council's going to look at and say, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. You know what I'm saying? What are some of the big unfunded or funded capital projects that are critical in your mind, or kind of up on the chopping blocks to lower the rate or keep it higher?
So that's an excellent question, and we've talked internally about what those projects are and how to bring those forward. So I'm going to leave it at that, Malcolm, that we will present in some fashion what projects are in the unfunded list, and then some of those even larger projects, how we can view those in the financial model, or how we're proposing to address funding those big projects. Unless our director wishes to respond differently.
Thank you, Erin. Members of the commission. I think she did a great job. I think there's just a distinction when we look at the scenarios running through and we look at our unfunded CIP. It does exclude larger projects specific to like full build out of Red Gap Ranch. Also think things like advanced water treatment. These things that are these projects that do push the $200-300 million mark. So even when we look at the unfunded, we did make an option to, so while there'll be levers within the model for consideration, but when we run through the scenarios, we have isolated that to take a realistic approach. I'd venture to say that right now I'm not necessarily aware of anything on the unfunded list that would be, that would rise to that level. I think right now it's just about funding strategies, as Ms. Young alluded to, and the timing of when those projects come into the queue to be performed, when they would move from the unfunded list to the funded list, and what would be our strategies through the rate study to address those. So hopefully that just elaborates a little bit further. Thank you.
Just to follow on that one, Director, I think when we come into the October meeting, sort of sources and uses is always important, but then what's in, what's out. We know we've got some big things out there. Sewage treatment plant, Red Gap Ranch. Is it in, is it out, or to what extent? But also you've got the unfunded CIP piece of that. But if something comes in, what's the ops impact as well? And is there a hook in the rate structure to address that, or will that have to be addressed at the same time as that project comes in, right? Because as we saw with detention, we had some great capital come in, but now we've got to operate it and clean it, and that's another $1 million a year. And so just so we aren't missing those things, I'd hate to be picking up pennies and watch the dollars float away, right? So yeah, and it's not easy, I get that, but I think there's going to be some sort of list of things, like realize this is not being touched, and because I think it's critical City Council understands the trade space here, what they're getting, what they're going to approve or not. And my second point would be somewhere in that little process, I want to make sure that when we come back with this is the budget, or excuse me, not the budget, but this is the recommendation on rates, that there's a clear desire, I think, from this commission and that city council does a reconciliation of how much of that differential can come out of different parts of the city's budget instead of just straight to taxpayers. That's critical to me because we've got to make some, in my mind, we need to make some priority choices and we can't just keep piling on.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't sure if you wanted a response to that, or if that was just a statement. Either way, I'm good.
Just a statement.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm just curious, how does, we live in interesting times right now with, we're awash in all this infrastructure money. How do you build the flexibility into your three options so you can take advantage of possible grant money that you could bring in? How do you create the staff hours to research and write the grants that are needed? I mean, how would that happen?
I'll take a stab at that. So in terms of grants, and I see Rick Tatter is on the call too. I hate to put him on the spot, but we anticipate each year what we might apply for grants, and then that money needs to be in the budget so that we have the flexibility to bring in the funds and funds can come in and out. So there's a certain amount of dollars in our financial model reserved as could be grant funded. Your second question on staff hours is an excellent question because some of us do struggle with not having enough time to apply for some of these. And we would then, we can look to a consultant to help us apply. And Stacy Bruckler-Neggs as our grants, I'm just going to call her our grants sort of director. She has a long title, but she is building staffing to help address, all the funding needs that are out there and helping staff. I'll leave my answer at that and then see if our director wants to add or if Rick happens to want to add.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, I think she did a great job. As far as the model looks at it, it does take into account. We do know that there have been grants awarded historically, so when we bring in the actuals into the model, we're also bringing in that. So you kind of create a pattern. So one scenario is you assume that the level of success we've had with grants would continue through. And so I think those considerations are given on what that looks like. And I think she alluded to the fact that we begin to create robustness in how we apply for those grants, not just the work that the city's doing, and creating robustness in their grant writing, but beginning to incorporate that into our scope of services for even the projects to include that either in the design level or the planning level as a task to identify those the grant opportunities and helping to kind of build out that framework and application. So I think both of those approaches.
Any further questions? Well, we have a long road ahead of us. And thank you, Aaron, for the update.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent suggestions, and we'll be back.
All right, so we'll move to item 4C. Don't sit down. Water policy review from Aaron Young.
Okay, good evening once again. Well, this is coming up. I believe that this was on the agenda as a request. Let's see, how come I can't start this? As a request from the commission for staff to provide you with some information. This was a request made, I think, like a year ago with some information on how we track projects, how we avoid maybe bringing forward something to you or to council that is, I think you said, catching you by surprise that, oh my gosh, this has been a big issue for city staff, and now all of a sudden you're learning about it, some emergency type issue. So you suggested a number of ways that staff might bring things forward to you, and you also thought, well, what are you already doing in your day-to-day that you can bring forward to the Water Commission that would help keep you informed of these bigger things. One of the recommendations from staff was to present our water policies to you. Our water policies are, let's see here, I'm gonna go, are there are like 8 different sections or so, and I'm just presenting the first section of these policies. They're sound financial policies and plans that are in accordance with laws, regulations, and good business practices. These are well-directed strategies which enable the utility to meet community needs at an appropriate cost. The management team, our staff, we understand the financial and business plans. We're able to make more consistent day-to-day decisions by having these policies. They help reduce the risk of maybe inappropriate decision-making. I don't know if inappropriate is the right word, but maybe reactionary decisions. And these help offer sort of predictable financial performance. Performances leading to better bond ratings, a lower cost of debt, and predictable rates. So tonight, I thought I'd just present the Section A on financial policies. And these actually started development in 2008. I believe it was at the direction of City Council to have water policies. The Water Commission approved in 2012, and then about 2 years later, City Council approved these. Policy A1 is, and these are for water and sewer and reclaimed water funds. Our annual payment for debt should not exceed 20% of total operating revenues. We have the goal of maintaining more than 25% of total operating revenues and reserves. No subsidies, no gifts. So actually I forgot I was going to have these up. I'm sorry. They are in your packet. So in terms of no subsidies or no gifts, so there could be a situation where City Council determines that we need to set aside an amount of water to be sold at a reduced rate. We look for a non-utility source to still cover the cost. So that's an example. We also aim for a consistent collection of fees and service charges, which we're going to get into with the rate study. And there are a number of strategies for how we do that consistently, yes.
Quick question. On the reserves, so I assume that we are able to roll over reserves from year to year, or do you have to clear it out and build up? In the federal world, you don't spend it, you lose it. But in the Flagstaff world, are you allowed to, let's say it's $1 million, can you just keep the $1 million going year to year and keep that reserve, or do you have to flush it out and
I'll let our director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great question. I think when we talk about that reserve, really what we're talking about is maintaining a minimum cash balance. And so that doesn't have to be carried forward because it's set aside. It's held in a separate account. And through our budgeting process wouldn't exceed that amount. That has to stay in reserve.
Yeah, so we're allowed to carry cash. Some
Yes.
municipalities can't, so, okay.
So that would be funds like the ratepayers pay for water, sewer, whatever.
Yes. Yeah, the revenues that come in, so that amount of cash set aside as the reserve, the cash balance.
Moving on to policy A2, and I'm just looking through the policies here. This policy pertains to stormwater. We shall collect revenues from properties using, with impervious surfaces according to an equivalent rate unit. And the stormwater utility shall have a goal of maintaining more than 10% of the total estimated annual operating revenues in reserve. Policy A22, stormwater utility shall issue runoff credits for properties implementing eligible stormwater catchment systems within, as described in the stormwater manual. Policy A3, rate design elements. Rates should be set based on cost of service. We're required to do that. The commodity charges should reflect the costs across all customer classes. Rate structures should be designed with the goal of encouraging water conservation. The design of recommended rates should include provisions that will provide a minimum of 25% of revenues from fixed costs. So that might be a policy we'd want to talk about when we get into looking at different rate structures. And the design should anticipate a balance between conservation and commodity charges and revenue stabilization, fixed rates. I know a lot of utilities are moving higher to a higher percent of revenues from fixed costs, even up to 90%. So I think we're kind of low. It seems to be a trend that utilities are moving away from that. Policy A3, A32, water and sewer rates shall be internally reviewed annually. We can do that when we have this rate model from Stantec. Any anticipated charges and the rate structure should be implemented in a timely manner in order to avoid large-scale shifts in rates, and with a formal rate study performed every 3 years. So we're behind on that one. This policy also talks about, having funding options for large capital expenditures, just what we were talking about, not putting all that burden on our ratepayers. Policy A4, if we were to acquire a private water company, we have a number of strategies in place. In my time, I don't think we've been approached to acquire, but there are a number of small utilities within city limits. And that is the end of that section on finance. If you would like to continue discussing these policies or just having staff present, we can move on. The next one would be on water resource management policies. I think the reason, bringing this to your attention is knowing that we have these policies in place that staff are operating within, and these help us avoid emergencies as much as the policies, guide us. So if it's helpful, we're glad to return and keep this up. We can talk about policies. We could talk about changing some policies. And that would be, this hasn't been updated since 2014, so we might be ready for that. So thank you for your time.
Any questions?
What about an option of making these available for review, and if somebody has something they want to talk about, we bring it up?
Is that then the direction I'm hearing from the commission? Well, if you'd like to review them, you have the document, it's online, and I think we've provided you all with a hard copy. I think there are like 8. It's to F, I think, G maybe. The policies that I work under are, I self-report myself. Or I explain to my peers that, hey, we're approaching this limit, we've got to drill a new well. So as far as all the policies that come to mind, we're self-reporting and self-regulating, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I would also add, so you are correct, for the financial policies, those were provided to Stantec. So those are in review and in consideration, and those ones are reflected in the model. So things like cash reserves, debt capacity, which are set by the policy, are also reviewed through the financial. They do show up each year in our financial planning, so those are earmarked there. I think Ms. Young is right that when it becomes more specific to sections, right, that is measured, more self-regulate how they measure those. But it also is integrated into our day-to-day tasks where, as we bring contracts forward, as we execute our directives, that we tie those back to the policies. And so really it's that, again, so there's a essential audit that says if we're doing something that doesn't attach to a policy or directive, that should raise the question of, well, why are we doing it? Should we update the policy, or is this something we should really be doing? And so that is integrated into the day-to-day operational strategies of the city to do that kind of crosswalk and check our policies across what we're doing. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you so much.
You know, I think that is a policy within what I just went through, actually. You know, let's see, our goal is not to, you know, consistent collection of fees and service charges. I think that might be what you're talking about. Oh,
The public pays them, so what I'm saying is, are we charging enough maybe for some fee that 10 years ago, maybe now it should be costing more?
gotcha.
Yeah, I
That-
just
that-
wondered if anybody's ever picked that apart.
So that is a cost of service study, which is included within the rate study we're working on now. And Stantec has a list of our fees, and they'll be reviewing that. It's just that we haven't done that for a while.
There's also, might be some other fees that should be in there that aren't in there too, you know, because different things have to be accomplished now.
I think staff, when we drafted our scope of work to hire a consultant, we did list out some fees we'd like to see considered. And so we would, you'll be seeing what those are when those are presented. We'd like to see these updated on a regular basis. And I think it wasn't included in the last rate study scope of work for some reason. But going forward, as per our policies, they should be updated on a more regular basis.
Did they make recommendations and they were adopted, or how does it work?
Rick isn't on anymore. I don't remember fees being discussed in the last rate study. So I understand we have some fees out when some of us were at the Wildcat plant earlier today, that some of the fees haven't been updated since 2011 for sewage collection and such. So yeah, we're behind.
Okay, well, the economics are one of our major issues, so that's, all this little, helps, even though it might be small. Sometimes it might not be, and we've got a lot of construction going on, and I'm sure there's stuff based in that, so that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, I think when we looked at stormwater, we did some things like we changed the caps on the ERU units, how much a house is versus businesses, and made those adjustments. And I think as we go through the rate study, we'll be seeing some more things just like that on water and sewage as well. So in terms of ways to better address this and make it more appropriate is one way to look at it maybe. But yeah, we have to consider this because it's an evolving world and what we do evolve. So we've got to make sure that we've got the right fee targeted at the right type of work and right benefit to the citizens, right?
Well, if this is an anniversary of 10 years, I was just thinking it would be adjusted every year, but maybe some categories weren't. That's why I was thinking this would be the time to address it. And I would know, you know, there's a lot of detail because there's a lot of different things, but I would hope somebody's looking at it.
Yeah, that'll be part of the cost of service analysis.
Malcolm?
Now that I'm sitting here thinking about this document, it hasn't been updated since 2014, right? So council policies and council goals, should this be examined with respect to current council goals and policies? Should it be looked at for potential update? I mean, it's been almost 10 years, right? So, I don't know.
And as we all read that, we can consider and ask that.
Yes, yes, good. Thank you, Chairman.
You know, I'm just thinking about general philosophy. The city has reaped huge benefits from water conservation. Essentially, we've had flat demand since we started the conservation policy of tiered rates for residential. So are there areas like that, as you know, water conservation would be one where we're going to especially put focus on how we can maintain that level or increase the level of conservation and take that into account in the rate study?
Yes, that will come up. What Stantec is working on is they have all of our billing and consumption data. So they'll present a picture of how much water use is happening within each of our customer classes. And that's changed since the last rate study. So that'll be evaluated, and then they will make recommendations to continue water conservation, maybe in other areas. That will also mirror our water conservation strategic plan and the focus of those efforts, you know, on outdoor, mostly. A lot of it is outdoor. Did I answer your question, or?
Water conservation is just like one of the areas because it's made such a huge impact because we haven't had to develop near the water resources. If we hadn't done any conservation, we would need Red Gap Ranch right now.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Aaron, very much.
Thank you all for the conversation.
And Marion, if you could send the link to everybody, that would be huge because sometimes I get lost on the website. And then I'm wandering around. And it's a mess. Okay. Item 5, old business, we have none. So item 6, informational items to and from the chair, commission, or staff. Anybody have anything for that? Ms. Erin Andrews?
I do have an update. Our water services team submitted 5 applications to the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority Water Conservation Grant Fund. We were awarded yesterday. The WIFA board approved an advanced metering infrastructure grant. The total application was $1 million, and the match was 75% to our $250,000. So we're able to boost our smart meter installation much faster than we would have otherwise. So we're excited about that.
Is that primarily homes or is it also industry?
I don't specifically know but I think it covers everything. Yeah.
All right. I'd just like to take a moment and thank Director Jones and Aaron and the team. We had a walkthrough of Wildcat this morning with some of the Chamber of Commerce advocacy committee people and folks, and it's important to give them vision on what the plant is doing, what the long-term goals are, and just operations day in, day out, the challenges, so that as we look down the road to potentially look at, or not potentially, but to revamp, retool Wildcat, that they're on board in terms of the process, understanding the challenges, and can help us and be a critical part of our success instead of late in the game surfacing and wondering what the heck's happening, right? So there's a lot of skill there to go help get grant money, a lot of good understanding in terms of business community being on board. So that was really time well spent, and Director Jones and Aaron did a great job representing us all to that group. So thank you. Anything else? No? Okay. Then let's move to item 7, adjournment. We can adjourn the meeting at 5:07 PM. Thank you.